This is Flowshell, my submission for the 2025 Wheel Reinvention Jam. Flowshell allows you to run processes, load files, and manipulate data just like you would in a traditional command line shell like Bash. But Flowshell throws away the entire command line interface because it is archaic and terrible. Instead, Flowshell uses a node graph, like you would see in game engines or other creative tools. To show you how this works, I have a few files here with benchmark results from my job. Let's open them up in Flowshell and take a look at them. In order to do that, all we have to do is drag and drop them from a file browser, such as FilePilot, into Flowshell. This creates 3 load file nodes. Each one will load one of our benchmark files. We can then click the Run button on any of these nodes to execute them and see their results. In this case, we can see that each of these files contains several runs of a benchmark, along with various metrics from each run. Now, these are relatively large, and it might be interesting to see how the benchmarks progress over time, because each of these benchmark runs corresponds to a different version of the code that I was testing. To do that, we can try to find the minimum, or the average. I'm going to go with the average. We're going to go with the average score from each of these benchmarks, meaning that I want to take the average of all the columns here. To do that, I can add an average node. There are also other modes like min and max, which is why I got mixed up there. If we drag this in and then click run, we can see the average for each column of all of this data. Now, already this is quite a departure from a traditional command line shell, in that we are seeing structured data here in the form of a table instead of raw text. And in fact, if we want, we can see the raw text. If we simply change the load file node to raw bytes and run it, well, here's the raw bytes of the CSV. So what's going on here is that Flowshell actually has types and structured data. This is inspired by a shell known as new shell, which adds lists, records, and tables, and I think a few others. And this is very useful for dealing with data from CSV or JSON or other formats. And so I just took that. It's really good. So when you parse a CSV in Flowshell, it actually creates a table, which behind the scenes is a list of records, which is kind of a neat fact. Then the aggregate node actually knows how to aggregate lists or tables. If it sees a list, it just aggregates the numbers in the list. If it sees tables, it aggregates each column individually. And that's what we're seeing here. Now, we can also just do this for the other nodes, which will allow us to see some of the progression over time. So now we have these 3 different results, which could be useful, but it'd be nice to see them all together. To do that, all we have to do is grab the concatenate tables node. This works within the structured data format to glue together tables that have the same schema, that is, the same columns. So by simply dragging those together, now we have a view of all of the benchmark runs and their average scores over time. And we can see that if we look at these key metrics, such as the average frame time metric here, we see that this 3rd run of the benchmark, which was in a file known as Flute3, is a substantial performance improvement, actually. If we want to then save this result to a file, we can simply add the save file node, drag in the data, and we'll call this benchmark progression.csv. And we click run. Flowshell also has type errors. What we're seeing here is a message saying, cannot write type table, etc., all the columns as raw bytes. Use another format like CSV instead. And this is because Flowshell doesn't know how to encode a table unless you give it an encoding. But if we do CSV, then it's fine. And in fact, if we look back at FilePilot here, we indeed see benchmark progression.csv. And if we open this in Excel, we see that it totally did work. Now, one of the most important benefits of a visual shell like this is that it allows you to explore in a way that you otherwise could not without a lot of fussing. If we want to look at this data a different way, we don't have to delete anything that we just did. We can just go somewhere else. Forgive the rendering error here. I have no idea what's going on. Suppose that for that benchmark that was a speed improvement, we want to see more information besides just the average. Well, we can go ahead and add the min and the max. And when we do that, oh boy, I gotta move these nodes out of the way. I'll just move everything further down. We'll be fine. Anyway, we now have the mean, the min, and the max. And yet again, if we want to see those all together, we can simply concatenate the tables. And when we do this, now we can see actually, let's switch the order around. I want to have the mean in the middle and the min on top, and then the max on the bottom. And there we go. Now when we run it, we have our min, mean, and max. And again, we can save that to a file. We'll call this one flute3 summary.csv. And yet again, flute3 summary has been written. So we now can just go back and forth exploring the data that we've loaded into Flowshell without having to comment anything out, without having to pipe anything to temporary files. It is all just right here, readily accessible, and easy to explore. There's a couple other things that make Flowshell interesting, and to do that, I'm going to go down here into some empty space. First, I'm going to point out that there are keyboard shortcuts because I felt it was important, and I would like to work toward a keyboard-only way of working with this to the greatest extent possible. Let's do run process. The run process node does exactly what a shell would normally do and runs a subprocess. If we load Handmade.Network using curl and we click run, then we see the standard out here on the right. But not only that, we also get the standard error and a combined standard out and standard error. This is a very useful property because it means that if you want to access different fields from the result, you can do so instantly without having to rerun a past command. And we can see this if, for example, we grab the lines node. If we drag in lines and run this, we see that what it's done is it's taken the raw bytes from curl and it has split them into lines. It's now a list. We could also drag in standard error here and see that. And there's the little download summary that you got. Or we can see them combined, in which case you see the download summary at the top, followed by the standard out. And notice that I'm not rerunning curl when I do this. The run process node has already run, and it has a result saved. And I can reuse that result over here with no issue. Let's go one further and add the trim spaces node. And this one, I'm even going to run at the command line after I hook it up by doing Control-R. And now what we see, if we go back and forth between lines and trim spaces, is that it has gone line by line and removed the spaces from the beginning and end. And if we wanted to go back and look at the standard out again, or let's say the standard error, then we can simply run the node again in order to see that change. Except we don't quite see that. The reason is that when we run trim spaces on its own, lines already has a value. What we need to do is run all of the inputs fresh again. And we can do that simply by clicking this button. Oops, a space snuck in there, my mistake. And there we go. So this rerun command and inputs thing makes sure that you get fresh data if you're willing to spend the time doing all of the previous steps. But Flowshell has one more useful feature for this case. If we actually don't want to rerun the curl because we know that the data isn't really changing, but we do want to rerun everything else, we can just click this pin button. And now, when we make a change here and click rerun here, you see it happens much faster, and only the lines and trim spaces are running. So this allows you to keep a very slow part of your process from re-executing over and over again, which is one of my biggest pet peeves with command line terminals. If you want to do this at the command line, you generally have to pipe the result to an intermediate file and then comment that out and then load that. Not so here. You can just keep it all right in front of you, pin it to prevent it from being rerun unnecessarily, and then just explore. So that's it for Flowshell for now. I would like to add a ton more nodes. I could probably spend weeks and weeks just adding more nodes to the system, but I'm very happy with this as a proof of concept and the result of just a single week of work. So I don't have any info about how to use it because it's a buggy mess. Thank you for watching.